Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt Combs, and I'd like to welcome you back to Expanding the Zone again this week. Appreciate the feedback there on show 43 when we were talking change. And, Matt, I know that um, just a lot of good conversation, different things as the show continues to grow. I love the follow up conversations it gives me with some of the listeners, some of the people we know really well, some of the people I'm getting to know through the show, maybe through an email or through social media message or so forth. It's just kind of a neat thing to be a part of. And here we are as we get ready for show 44. I welcome you in again. Love to say hello to those watching us on our YouTube channel as well as listening out there on all of our podcast apps. And encourage you to do both so you have the ability to watch and listen. But yeah, Matt, as we get ready for show 44, we're talking play versus practice. And I think in show prep, looking back, I mean, gosh, it seems like forever ago now. I think we go all the way back to show 8. We've talked a little youth sports before, and I know we talked about participation, we talked about rule changes, and we talked about the emphasis on winning, and we did talk a little bit of play versus practice. I think some things that have come up now as we come to the end of Little League season, and where you have a lot of Little League teams continuing to travel. I know AAU's going strong, Legion's finishing up strong. A lot of different things, club volleyball, as they get ready to join their high school volleyball teams now, just all sorts of different things. And we're going to focus a little bit more on youth, but I think we'll probably naturally touch a little bit into the high school level and so forth tonight. Just what's your opening comment when you think play versus practice? I mean, I think growing up, if we weren't the old adults now, if we look back to when we were younger, we probably liked to play. Let's face it. Put a scoreboard on, let's play. As we get older, we realize the value of both. I guess I'll just start there. The opening comment when you think of play versus practice in today's competition landscape, you end up thinking what?
Yeah, Shayne, what got me thinking about this, I guess, was my experience of coaching Little League baseball this summer. We're pretty blessed in our area to have a good Little League baseball program, a dynamic program. It's been there a long time. I think they're celebrating, I can't remember if it's like 50, 60 years or something like that. The Side Valley Youth League down here celebrating. Well-run organization. But I do think one thing I did notice, I think we fall into probably the same trap everybody falls into, that we end up playing a lot more games than we are playing a lot more, I guess, than what we're able to practice. And I think there's several reasons that I know we're going to touch on a few of those. I'm not going to get into every single one right now, but that's kind of what kind of got my thought on this. And as you and I were kicking around the idea of this topic, we revisited a little bit of episode 8 where we talked, like you said, a lot about different stuff about youth sports, only one of which was the practice versus play thing. But really, I think it goes, we could probably touch on some things all the way up through the high school level, but the question basically is this: are we putting enough time and emphasis on developing skill, teaching skill, working on fundamentals, or are we spending most of our time playing games? And like you said, everyone wants to play games, so how do we balance that? I think it's not as simple as just saying, well, we need to practice more and play less. I think we're going to have to be creative in how we juggle those two.
Well, Matt, I guess one thing that I think of is I've been guilty of saying that, man, it's hard to keep kids excited about playing in junior high. It's excited, or keep them excited about playing in high school, because what happens nowadays, we are starting to play. Like in our area, for example, basketball kids pretty much start playing organized against other schools in the 3rd grade, and they do it 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Most of your coach pitch stuff in little leagues, what would you say, about age 5 or 6 start in, and they go all the way to age 12, correct? So there's this dynamic of burnout. There's this dynamic of, man, they play so much by the time they get to junior high. How excited are they for a 7th grade basketball game? How excited are they to maybe not try track instead of baseball because they've played 6, 7 years of baseball already. They've kind of been there, done that. But at the same time, we always ask about practicing and can we get more time in to teach more fundamentals and to do more things that maybe we grew up in terms of the camp and things like that. I guess that's the first place I want to start. How do we balance that? Because we always like to be very fair in these conversations. How do we balance in terms of you've watched your kids come up through this age group. They want to play. Let's face it, we're out in the yard. It's one of those things where even if you want to practice or work on something, the kid is going to be like, hey, well, let's do this. We'll do this, and you're all time pitcher, and you play this, and you play this. There's a game, and so how do we balance that in terms of keeping the excitement while maybe bringing in a little bit more? Now that you're going through it at the little league level and maybe borrowing some of that 20 25 years of high school experience, how do we balance that to where I guess we get both the excitement and a little bit more of the work that we're desiring?
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not an easy balance because I'll give you the example of baseball that I just used a minute ago. Okay, so we play around 20 games over the course of, I guess, right around 2 months, maybe a hair less. So we're playing, 2 games, sometimes 3 games in a week, right? Um, so I look at it at the youth level. One thing you have to keep in mind is the commitment that the parents have to make. I mean, it's extremely difficult when you have parents from, maybe they live 30 minutes away, right? To say, okay, you're already coming in for 2 or 3 games. Now we want you to also, we're going to practice 2 nights a week too. And all of a sudden now you're making a 4 or 5 night commitment. Because as much as I
For
want,
an 8-year-old.
well, that's what I mean. And as much as I want to teach skill and know that that's important, you just mentioned burnout. That's where the burnout really happens. If you all of a sudden have an 8-year-old that's putting in 5 nights a week, that's where the burnout happens. The burnout, I don't think, happens because you play 2 or 3 games a week. I think the burnout starts to happen if it's a 5, 6 night a week commitment at that age. So unfortunately, as a coach, if the schedule has been set and you're going to play that many games, your hands are tied in terms of how many practices you get. You try to get some practices in the preseason. Even then, you got to find an indoor hitting facility. Typically in our area, you're not going to have the weather to go outside. Once you finally are allowed to practice, if you get good enough weather, you're talking, you might get 2 practices a weekend for maybe 3 weeks to a month before the season. So what is that? Let's say you get maybe 8 practices in. So you're getting 8 practices in. If the weather's good and cooperative, maybe 2 to 4 indoor hitting sessions in. So you're barely, and then, after that, the season starts and you're not going to hardly get to practice at all, unless you're one of those guys who just tells parents, hey, you're going to be here 5 or 6 nights a week. And I'm just not willing to do that at that age group, not to those parents and not to those kids. So you're practicing about half the amount of games. So in other words, you might be practicing 15 times and playing 20 games. You understand what I'm saying? You're not even getting a 1-to-1 ratio over the course of an entire season of practice versus games, where you look at the high school level. In high school basketball, you're probably practicing 3 times as much as you play. High school football, well, that'd be probably about 5 times as much as you play, right? Something similar. You're probably practicing 4 or 5 days a week and play once. So as you get to now baseball, as you know, Shayne's a little different, right? Because you're playing so much and the season's short. You probably don't get as much practice at the high school level as what you obviously don't as what the other sports get, right? But maybe not enough, you could argue. But I guess what I'm saying is at our youngest levels, where we need the most work on skill development, we're getting the least amount of practice time. And to me, if we're trying to find a solution to that, I don't see a way of solving that, unfortunately, without playing a few less games. And I hate to say that because kids want to play games, but if we're really trying to, how do you play 2-3 nights a week and get into 2 practices a week? It's pretty tough.
Well, Matt, we talked about change last week, and I guess this
Right.
is something that was on my mind as we were reflecting on that show and preparing for this show. I want to ask you to be a parent for a second, and maybe combine it with being a little league coach. Something that was on my mind is I wanted to ask you if parent burnout is a real thing. And let me kind of set the table for you here, and I'd love to hear your take on this. I think it's been acceptable. I don't know how much of a change it is in terms of what you're describing in Little League, right? I don't know if it's
Right.
because it's a summer thing. I don't know if it's late in the spring, school's about out throughout the summer, vacations. I don't know if people are a little bit more willing to miss a Little League game here or there than maybe they are as they get older or whatnot. But for whatever reason, baseball seems to be baseball. Then some of your hardcore people, man, they even go and they play another, gosh, 15, 20 games beyond what you just described. Some are still playing now. But if you look at some of the differences in little league sports, basketball is one that jumps out at me. I described before, we grew up, we played more of a fourth, fifth, sixth grade in-house, not a lot of travel because it's at your home school. You're playing against your other school or classmates, right? You're playing in-house, and you might form an all-star team, travel team, whatever word you want to use, play a little bit at the very end. But again, by the time you get to seventh grade, I think parents and kids were both excited. I guess what I would ask you as a parent, even someone who loves sports and believes in sports, is parent burnout real? Because I'm going to be honest with you. Some of the people who I know enjoy sports, they've made the comments to me as their son or daughter has gotten to like the fifth, sixth grade. Oh man, it doesn't break my heart they decide not to play this year.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you're going to this school and to this school and to this school on a Sunday afternoon. So you're going to church and you're doing this and you're up for work the next day. And what used to be the little league commitment is totally different now. And you obviously do it because you love your kids and you believe in sports. But even someone that loves sports, in your most honest moment, that's got to be a little bit harder in terms of the wear and tear on families, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're human, and as much as you want your kids to participate, you get tired. It's tough. That's kind of what I just said about that commitment. You ask the parents. I think when you're running a youth program, you have to think about that. You're asking these parents to do a lot. You're asking these parents, hey, get your kid to X number of games a week, get your kid to practices, work concession stand, right? Volunteer your time. I mean, and I think parents do get a little burned out. And I think quite honestly, with kids, I think if we're looking at this honestly, I think kids, um, the majority of kids probably do get a little tired of it if the commitment is too great, if you're there too many nights a week. I think sometimes we base our approach on, like last week we talked about when you base your approach on best case scenario, right? When you're trying to deal with change or no change, sometimes we base our approach to youth sports on what what that kid who eats, drinks, and sleeps it wants to do, right? Like, because you're going to have certain kids that just soon play baseball every day if they could, play basketball every night if they could. You're going to have that kid, right? If, hey, do you want to practice 5 nights a week? Heck yeah, I do. I want to be there. You know what I mean? But you're also going to have a lot of younger kids that don't want to do that. And I think, part of what you want out of youth sports is to build numbers and to keep kids interested. And again, I just think we've got to figure out, and like now, and honestly, I think as coaches, we have to be creative too. I mean, one thing, using the baseball example again, is what we tried to do is, maybe that hour we ask parents to be there about an hour before game time. Maybe we don't have batting practice every single night. Maybe some of those nights we go to try to jump on the back diamond and do some infield work and work on, because I think sometimes too, it's how you use that practice time, Shayne, at the youth level. Because one thing that's interesting to me is there's certain skills in every sport that kids are going to naturally do whenever they just play that sport in their backyard, right? Or they get together with dad. For instance, in baseball, what's a father or son going to do? The dad's going to pitch to the kid, right? He's going to hit, or they're going to go out in the yard and they're going to throw. But what can't they work on, just father and son? Well, they can't work on maybe situational, fielding, base running. Maybe they can't work on cutoff man, right? Stuff like that. Those are the things that, as a baseball coach, to me at least, you have trouble teaching your kids if you don't get to practice with a group of like 9 or 10 kids. Does that make sense? I mean, some of that other stuff you can do individually. It's just like in basketball, right? What do? You go out in the yard and you shoot. You shoot on your driveway hoop or whatever. You dribble. But what can't you do? Well, you can't learn how to set good screens. You might not be able to learn how to box out. You might not be able to learn how to, how to use a screen, whatever. These are things that to work on those skills, you have to have team practice, not just individual stuff. So I think sometimes as coaches at the youth level, we have to be creative in how we use our time, knowing that we have limited time. I'm sure you run into this a little bit as a high school baseball coach, don't you? I mean, if I say to you, Shayne, okay, look, you've got 3 games this week, you're going to be lucky maybe to get 1 outdoor practice in. Aren't you thinking, okay, what do we need to work on the most? It may not just be let's everyone hit or everyone throw. We may have to work on some situational stuff. You have to be creative, I think, in how you use your time.
Well, I think the thing that you are saying there that really jumps out at me is a quality versus quantity discussion. When you're
Right.
talking quality, I think you're talking about the what and the how. And I guess one example, we're all the time big sports fans, and we're all the time linking it to things in the sports world. And now, one of the biggest things this past weekend would have been the British Open, the Open Championship, and Cam Smith, the young kid that came from behind there, and simply won the golf tournament. McIlroy did very little to lose it. Cam Smith just basically came out on the last day and won the tournament, getting the 20 under, and he's known as one of the best putters in the world. And Matt, I think this is something you can relate to as someone who loves to play golf. Is you probably love to play golf as an adult far more than you love to practice. I'm not saying you don't go out and hit some range balls, or if you're struggling. I know you were struggling with the driver there a little bit this year. You said you went out and hit some extra rounds of range balls or whatnot. They talked about this guy Saturday night after the third rail, spent like an hour on the putting green, was back out there the next morning because he just couldn't get anything to fall. He was disgusted. And we just think about the number of balls that these guys hit, the number of chips they hit, the number of putts they hit. They practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to prepare for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's not even counting how they warm up and how they cool down, before and after a round. So when you think of just how much you love to play, and we think of the best players in the world, how many times they rep it, it got me thinking about, as a high school coach, I try to challenge my guys. Are we getting 100 defensive reps for every game rep that we face? You know what I'm saying? So, when starting from day one of preseason, when we start to rep and we start to count our reps, are you able to take 50 to 100 ground balls for every ground ball you're going to field in the game? That takes a lot of hours to do. We try to do that. You know what I mean? We rep it over and over and over and over. And when I think of that at these higher levels, it brings me down to the little league discussion. And I say all that to bring it back to this little league discussion and this point right here. How do we not burn the kids out on the work, but at the same time teach them how to put a little time in? Because when I work with younger kids, a lot of times they absolutely hate the soft toss, they hate the
Right.
tee work, or they
Right.
hate the ball handling drills, or they hate you know what I'm saying? It's one of those things where they want to play. And sometimes I see that they end up into their freshman, sophomore, junior year before they really realize how to go work on their game. Don't you think that's as much of a thing that we're missing from the lack of practice time sometimes, is just teaching kids how to go out and get their work in? If the average 12-year-old goes out on the driveway right now and tries to go to work on their game for a half hour, how many would know what to do? In other words, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Where I know this time of year, one thing I love is the individual workouts. You've heard me say that before in terms of basketball. Well, I feel like we're starting to get sophomores, juniors, seniors in our culture that they almost don't even need me as we get into the third week of July. You know what I mean? They could almost, like clockwork, go in and they could almost do this and this and this. And they even know some of their keys that they do well, things they're working on, and so forth. Does that make sense? I feel like we're
Yeah.
missing the boat on teaching kids how to go. Thinking back when you were younger, I know you put a lot of time into it, but at what age do you feel like you developed that maturity, and where do you think some of that came from? Was it camps that you went to? Was it something you learned from a coach? Try to think back to a player, and now think as a coach in terms of what's missing in terms of the kids being able to just fall in love with the work part of it to get better.
I think somewhere along the line, okay, I think I think we started to sort of gamify everything. Okay. So it's like, the kids of this current generation, they grow up playing games, right? Whether video games, whether, whatever. I mean, just games. And everything they do to keep their interest, it's got to be some, like even my own son, when we go out and work on stuff, right? I'll say, let's go out. I'm going to pitch to you. And I might throw 30 pitches to him. And then guess what he wants to do? Dad, okay, I'm going to run the bases now. You try to get me out. You know what I mean? It has to just kind of become a game. And I think we've lost the art of teaching kids how to grind. I mean, that's kind of, I think, what you're talking about, right? I mean, it's like, you made a comment, sometimes they're sophomore, junior, senior before they figure it out. And I would argue, do they always figure it out? I don't think they always do, because I think sometimes, like you said, in the case of your girls' teams, you've done a good job with the individual workouts of at least teaching that process of how to grind it out, how to work. I mean, I can remember stories of you said that players don't like soft toss or hitting off a tee. Well, hitting off a tee is okay for Joey Votto underneath the stadium and the batting cage. So it's like these guys that are the best in the world do it. You know what I mean? Why can't our little league team be made to do that? You find it a little bit boring. Well, okay, we're going to do it anyway. And I'm not saying it has to be, when you're coaching 8-year-olds, that the whole practice has to be a grind. You have to mix some things in, right? But don't you think we owe it to them too, to teach them that sometimes it's just work? Sometimes you got to put a little work in, and it may not be fun, quote unquote fun, all the time, but it's just part of growing as a player. Some people may have heard the story. I know it's been shared on other podcasts of Kobe Bryant, how he used to, before his workouts even started, he would just do footwork. He wouldn't even take shots or dribbles. It'd just be pivots and jab steps. You're talking about a guy who, in my opinion, is a top 5 player of all time. All right. And he's just pivoting and jab stepping for 30 minutes before he even gets into. Can you imagine if you asked a kid to pivot and jab step for a half hour before he even got into taking shots? They'd look at you like, oh man, come on. They wouldn't want to do that for 5 minutes. Right. You mentioned golfers. I was watching something the other day, a typical range session of what players do. And at the highest level, they'll take the first half hour and they'll put down alignment sticks, and they'll just work on, how's my alignment? How's my shoulder turn? These are the best players in the world. And what do high school kids want to do? They want to hit 7 wedges and then pull their driver out and start ripping it. I don't think we've done a great job of teaching kids just how to put the work in, how to go out. Hey, you're going to go out in the driveway and take 100 shots today. And there's no competition other than, if you want to keep track of how many you made, you're competing with yourself, but you're going to get 100 shots in. I think it's even filtered to the high school level, Shayne, in practices. A lot of times you'll go to a clinic now and they'll talk to you about how, I was at a clinic a couple of years ago and they were talking about how you should keep score in every drill and everything needs to be a competition. Every single thing you do, make it a competition. And I understand what they're saying. I do think competition is important in spots, but I think too, we need to also in practice sometimes not keep score and not make it a competition, and then see which kids will work hard anyway. You know what I mean? Which kids are going to bust their butt and give 100% effort when there's no reason to, when there's no score being kept, when there's no losers have to run, none of that. Just we're running a drill for no reason other than to get better. Who's going to work hard? Because I think sometimes we miss that when we have to constantly create a enjoyable environment in everything we do. I don't know if I'm explaining that right or not, but there has to be something still for, here's how you grind, here's how you put work in. And I think it's okay to even teach that at the younger level. I'm not saying like if you're going to run a 4th grade basketball practice that you got to do an hour and a half of that. You've got to mix in some knockout. Okay. You've got to mix in some different stuff, or we're going to keep score here. But is there anything wrong with putting 2 kids at a basket and saying, hey, we're going to pass, take 2 dribbles, take a jump shot until each of you get 25 shots up? I don't think there is. I think there's something to be said for that.
Oh, I don't think there's any question. I think you bring up a great point about the competition in terms of just wanting to win just for the sake of winning. You know what I mean? And just in terms of if I'm doing this, I want to get better. Um, I think there's a very natural thing of if I was out shooting 50 free throws, I wanted to know how many I made. You know
Oh,
what I
you're
mean? Like,
competing with yourself, right? I mean,
right,
sure.
right. And I think what's interesting is this. As kids start to get older, and I don't know what age it is for some advanced players, maybe it is younger than junior high. And if it is, it is. Who am I to tell them and their parents that it's not? But what I do find is this: as kids start to get older, I see young ladies get into club volleyball, and I see some of my guys get into summer baseball, and some get into some high level legion ball, which is great. They're seeing high level pitching all summer, and they're getting some quality at bats. Um, if they're pitching to some elite lineups. I see it in basketball. They go out and play AAU. But here's the thing, Matt. Throughout the course of some junior high levels, even in the high school now, like I bet a high school basketball team, what would you say, plays another 20 some games in the summer. Then some of your kids might branch off and play another 10 to 15 with their AAU team, or in gosh, they may go in baseball and they may branch off and play another 40 some games in summer
Right,
baseball, depending on where they play.
right,
And I guess what I would challenge them, so follow what I'm saying at the high school level to link back to what we talked about in Little League. I guess what I would challenge them is this: the exposure that you're playing against better competition. Like what did we hear from a really young age? Got to play against better to get better, right? We've always
right,
heard that. And I think for more times than not that's a true statement.
right,
And but I guess what I would challenge them with is this: if you go out and you play in an AAU for a weekend and you have a role and you go out and you play, how many threes are you getting off of the catch? How many shots are you taking off the dribble and creating compared to an individual workout for 2 or 3 times in the gym for an hour? Does
right,
that make sense? There has to be that balance. At the same time, if all you do is go in the gym and you stand still and you shoot for an hour 3 times, are you really taking it to the floor and testing it against competition? You see the
right.
balance there?
Oh
I
yeah,
In no way am I saying that playing is bad. What I'm saying is there has to be a balance between the practice and the playing. I never on this show wanted to make this a play versus practice. I
right.
wanted to figure out how the two work together to form the best product, both individually and collectively. So you follow what I'm saying there? Like if a
Yeah,
kid is going to go out and play a double header on a Sunday afternoon, he may get 8 at bats.
right,
Well, is that enough? You know what I mean? Is that better than going and getting 50 cuts on soft toss, 50 cuts on the tee, and then having 50 cuts from the cage? You
right,
see what I'm saying? Like in terms of a hitting workout, you know, one other, if you do the one, but you don't go get the game reps, maybe you are missing out on an opportunity to see some elite pitching and get live at bats. But if all you're doing is showing up and getting some live at bats, you may see what, a total of 20 pitches on the day, and take some cuts, and that's it, and then you don't play again till next weekend. There has to be a mixture of things, if that makes sense. If you play shortstop and you had 5 ground balls hit to you on the weekend, and then the first baseman's tossing some to you in between innings, but you never take any reps in the middle of the week,
right.
the one's not matching the other. Does that make sense? Like I don't want to make it. I guess I should ask you. Do you agree with this? Isn't necessarily a play versus practice debate, even all the way down to the little league level, as much as it is a balance of making the kid really enjoy what he or she's doing and want to get better, but two, taking the time to get better in both aspects of playing and practicing.
Yeah, no, I think I think it is the balance that we're looking for. However, you can achieve that. I mean, I think in a perfect world, we'd love to play. Going back to my baseball example, we'd love to play 20 games as long as we could get 2 practices in a week. The problem is, it's pretty hard to do. So you have to figure, okay, maybe the only adjustment is to cut it back to maybe 15 games in those situations, right? So where that some weeks maybe you're only playing once, you can get a couple practices and whatever. Maybe in some situations, it's can we get just more creative with the way we use our time? Like I said earlier, we might be able to get more creative in ways to get those reps in, because I like what you said there. Those game reps are crucial, because you can take 50 cuts in the cage all day long, but until you stand in that box against a live pitcher and really get that experience of what it feels like to, as an 8-year-old, to be a little bit nervous, right? Oh man, this guy might hit me with the ball and I'm a little bit nervous. This isn't like bad pitching to me anymore. So those reps are crucial too, but it's again, how do we balance it? And I guess my point is, I don't think there's anything wrong with playing a few less games in certain situations. You know, one, to give kids more practice time, and two, to give kids something to look forward to. I mean, do you think sometimes, Shayne, we almost do youth sports in a way where it's a letdown when kids get, to the next level? I mean, like, I remember one AD telling me, well, I'll just tell you where this was at. It was over at Jackson High School. Jackson obviously loves their football, right? And he told me a funny story where he got a call from a parent one time saying, when are we going to find out the entire junior high football schedule? And he's like, well, it's online. We've got the whole season ready to go, scheduled out. She goes, I'm only counting 8 games. And he's like, well, yeah, that's the OHSA, rule. You get 8 games or whatever. And she said, that's ridiculous. We played way more games than that in Pee Wee football, So it was like a letdown when the kid got to junior high, because they were only allowed to play 8 games, right? And so I think sometimes we get that where, I've joked around, right, about, I can remember when I got my first varsity uniform, how I laid it out on the bed. Man, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And now, let's face it, some kids probably take a hit on the uniforms when they go from little league to high school, right? They're not as nice. But do you think, in all seriousness, Shayne, that we almost burst our bubble, so to speak, when kids are in elementary school, maybe even up like toward junior high, to where they just don't have anything to look forward to, or as much to look forward to? They've already, like you said earlier, when we played 7th grade basketball, we were playing some of those schools for the first time. Now they're playing them. Well, we played them 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade too. We've played this team every year. Is it the same, right? So, do we need to maybe take a step back and leave a little something, to for them in the future?
It's extremely challenging to athletic directors, high school coaches, even some of the people in terms of teaching and different things that they're involved in, because things are accelerating so young now that you're right. Like, I know at a small school, we hit it hard. We get hit hard by it. We run into situations where if you have kids that are pretty serious about a certain thing, I'm just going to be honest with you, Matt, we run into problems keeping them interested in us all the way into high school, if that makes sense. Because you just touched on this, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but let's face it. You go down into the little league, you go into AAU, you go into club volleyball. Some of these uniforms are unbelievable. Kids have, they have home away AAU uniforms where they might not even have that in junior high.
Right.
They have bags with their names on them. They, you used to have your basketball shoes be your school collar, and you get an AAU team and you'd have like 6 different collars of shoes, right? Where now it's completely different. They buy the shoes for the AAU team, and you come back to Paint Valley black and gold, and they might have red on. Does that make sense? Like, it's one of those things where, and it's just the time we live in. I had a situation where I watched an AAU kid, like in the 5th grade or 6th grade, have a press conference after her game. So, like, after their game, they put them down with the back behind them. You know what I'm saying? Like, for those of you watched on YouTube, it'd be like right here.
Right.
And they would have that, and they were getting asked, like, in a press conference. Now, you wonder how that kid's going to feel about playing 7th grade SVC basketball in the SVC. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, how about the? I've seen this a few times. The signings. Okay, when you agree to play on a travel baseball team, they have a signing. You know what I mean? Lay the table out there. I don't know what they're signing. I don't. Are you under contract? I mean, you know, you can't. You pay a fine if you quit the team. I don't know what you're signing. Okay, but like, so we're having a signing to play for the whatever, you know, travel baseball team there is at age 12. You know, it's just we're again, you have to ask yourself, is that for the kid? Is that for the parents? Is that for the adults? I mean, like, what's our motivation behind that, right? And I don't want to get off the practice play, you know, topic, but I think it all sort of ties in again to where, because what we're really talking about is priorities, I think. You know what I mean? Like, what are our priorities with youth sports and developing players coming up through? And it just seems like when you talk about things like that, our priorities get a little bit skewed, right? Maybe they're not focused on developing the player as much as sort of the glitter and the peripheral stuff that goes around it, you know.
It's tough, and I'm almost, I don't know if ashamed's the right word, but like I'm almost ashamed to say this out loud, but it's kind of the truth. And I feel like in professional development, I need to say these things sometimes just to have conversation and to hear what you have to say. And then I love getting the feedback from people. But Matt, I'll be honest, there's times that throughout my career, I know the right answer is to work hard with kids from a young age and introduce them early and bring them up and make it fun and get them. If I'm being most honest with you right here in front of everybody here, in front of the camera, I would say this to be the truth. Sometimes I just assume meet a kid for the first time going in about the 8th or ninth grade, and if they have great effort and attitude, take it from there. Does that make sense? And it's a shame that I've allowed myself to get to that point. And that's not to say that the things I work in, we don't put time in the little league, because we
Right.
do. We don't. You know, you've mentioned on here several times. I have too. We have incredible baseball little league at Paint Valley. We have. You know, I think everybody got hurt by the COVID year and so forth, but before and then after, we've had really good little league in our basketball programs. The football program at Paint Valley does an incredible job of camps and different things. But my point is, it is just so hard to introduce and keep them, because you're going to have some kids way up here and some kids way down here, and to bring these kids along a process that involves putting on a uniform, traveling to schools and playing in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade, just to get them to their freshman year. You know what I'm saying? It is a big time challenge, and I do think there's a balance of practice and games, because as soon as you cut back on games, and I'm sure you've run into this, you're going to have the concerned parent of the higher level kids of like, well, wait a minute now. I know so and so at this school, they kind of play this many games and they do
Right.
this, and this. Or how many times, growing up, would you always hear someone say, they'd be playing in a Gus Macker, and I'd always hear this one after they get beat like 15-4.
Right.
You'd hear, well, those guys have been playing together for like 3 or 4 years. I
Yeah.
mean, you'd always hear that. So like, again, is there some truth to that? Well, probably. You know what I mean? Like, but that's a whole nother. I don't mean to get off topic, but you see where I'm going with that. It's one of those things of, it really is a balance of how you keep things progressing compared to backing it off a little bit to where you still stay at the root. And I guess it goes back to your quality versus quantity, right? In terms of you got to pick and choose when you're going to get those times, and when you do, you got to really make sure you do quality stuff to make sure you're moving your culture in the right direction.
Well, and yeah, and I think what happens with the example you just used is I think parents get a little bit shook up, and they feel like, truthfully, they kind of feel like if they don't give their kid every opportunity, right, to play in these things, are they going to fall behind, right? Like you just mentioned, well, so and so over at another school's playing 20 games, we're only playing 12. You know, is he gaining an advantage over my kid? Um, you know, so and so's playing tackle football at their school. We're playing flag,
Mm.
are they going to be better than us in high school because of that? Which, I don't think, but there will be people that say that, right? There'll be
Now they
people that,
might be better in the seventh grade. Is that fair?
yeah, well, they could be, but I mean, I don't even know for sure, to be
And
honest
again,
with
I'm
you.
not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just saying,
Right.
I'm just throwing that out there in terms of trying to kind of pick the brain of people from every different aspect.
Yeah. And again, I think it's all kind of where As a parent, I think you have to look at the situation for your son or daughter and say, okay, what's their best way to develop right now? But I think what happens is, when it's a school team or whatever, we feel like, well, if I don't put my kid on that team, they're going to fall behind, you know. Um, and I don't think that's necessarily the truth. But I think there are some parents, it's keeping up with the Joneses, right? There's that fear of, we've got to stay in. If my son's one of the best players in the third grade, that means he'll be one of the best players in the 10th grade or 11th. But I said, that's the data doesn't support that, right? We've talked about that. I'm not going to get off on that today, but we've talked about that before. Just, when you look at the research, it does not support that necessarily. There's a whole lot of best third graders that aren't the best on their team when they get to high school. It's just the way it is. A lot of kids develop differently, different, skill levels or whatnot. Size, strength, all those things change. But so I think I think as a coach, though, what makes it hard, or as you're running a program, is, and you said this, or you touched on this sort of, you're trying to run a program that helps develop every kid to the fullest ability, and that's really hard because kids are at different stages of development. There's going to be that kid who's so good by the 5th grade, he needs a different type of practice, right, than that other kid who's just learning how to play needs. And that's extremely difficult. I can tell you, running, like, I've coached 3rd, 4th grade basketball the last few years. And, it's hard to run a practice at that age group because kids are at different skill levels. Certain kids need to work on other things less, or, it's just like teaching in a classroom, right? How hard is it when you have some kids reading at this level and some kids reading at another level? It's no different in sports, but yet we've got to find a way to teach all those kids. And that's really where coaching skill comes in. And unfortunately, who's coaching our youth teams? It's not always highly trained and highly skilled coaches. A lot of times it's just people volunteering their time and doing the best they can. And so it creates a challenge for sure.
Well, Matt, as we go into some closing remarks here and kind of summing up the show, I'd been jotting down some key things as I always do throughout. I just wanted to share them, and then I'll give you the final word. I always look at this as there's always an interesting perspective of a big school, small school, of an enrollment, of different challenges that you face, and then how kids break out and they go off to things outside of the school that we don't have as much control of, right? Different little league programs, and as we said, different AAU, different club, different legions, and all the way through. I think the things that have jumped out at me is this. Number one is the quality versus quantity. I think you have to look for opportunities. You don't necessarily have to pound and pound and pound and pound the fundamentals on them. You have to look for opportunities to, and then be very specific and very purposeful and intentional in teaching some of those things you need to. I think the other thing, and I think you just touched on this again, and I think it's come up 2 or 3 times tonight. I think we have to remind our elite that you never master the basics. So like when you're talking about the example you're just talking about before, we need to remind our elite that just because you can do a left hand layup doesn't mean you can't get better with your left hand, right?
Right.
Just because you're the best bunner at the age of 10, that doesn't mean there's not a higher level of bunning that you can do, or a higher level
Right.
of base running you can do. You used the example of Kobe Bryant going in and pivoting for a half hour. I use the example of the best putter in the world, arguably, going out and spending an hour after a round that he wasn't pleased with his putting, and then coming back the next day in the biggest round of his life and not missing a one of them. You know what I mean? Like he put that extra time in as one of the best in the world. So we have to remind our elite that just because you know better than the other 10 in this practice doesn't mean this isn't still very, very valuable for you. So I think it's the quality versus quantity. I think it's understanding that we never master the basics. We never can get too much of the basics. It's never too boring to get better at the basics. And if we go with that attitude, then I think that gives us a foundation to go. There's always going to be an uncomfortable stage of development. Like I always say at Little League Baseball, the the age that you're coaching right now, like that 9, 10-year-old level, man, that's uncomfortable, right? Why? Well, because at some point You've got to move the tee out. You got to move the coach pitch out. At some point, the kids have to start pitching and catching, and then they have to start hitting. Well, half of them can't throw the ball over the plate, right? There's some of those games are the most painful. When they get to A League, they start to throw more strikes. There's more pitchers. There's more, you know what I
Right.
mean? Would you agree there, that middle range?
Oh, no
It's the
question.
same,
Yeah.
it's the same way when we roll the ball out and we start trying to play games in the third grade at the 5-on-5.
Yeah.
You know
It's
what I mean? Like
horrendous. Right.
I don't even know what run offense means at that level. You see what I'm saying? Like it's one of
Right.
those where, and it happens in every sport. I could give you an example in every sport. But at some point, you have to have that uncomfortable. Hey, we got to start playing. We got to start teaching them in a game situation how to play, and that's important. So again, this isn't a practice versus play. This is a how do we practice and play show, in my opinion. So if ever I called it a play versus practice title, maybe that's not even the right title. Maybe it is more of a practice and play, and we've got to recognize how do we get one without just getting rid of the other. You know what I mean? In no way am I saying that a fourth grader just needs to come in and do fundamental work 2 days a week and then never ever play. That's not fun. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think we would pretend it's fun. It's not. But there does have to be a balance. At the same time, we don't need to come in and play 3 times and never ever do a left-handed layup or never ever do a ball handling drill, right? Or never, as you say, just simply run the bases
Right.
in terms of practice. So I guess those are the things that come for me. If I was going to sum it up, I would look for that play in practice. I'll give you kind of the last word here. If you're going to sum up tonight's show, maybe some of the big rocks that you take from the show that you want to reiterate here before we get out of here.
Well, I think you hit on a couple right there, and it was well said. I mean, I like how you said, there has to be. We've talked about before. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable to develop in anything you do. And with youth sports, there's definitely those stages and those phases. I think that you also mentioned, coaching that kid who is the best on the team at a young age. Um, in today's society, we just talked about it, right? They're being told very early how good they are, by a lot of different people. And I think as coaches, we need to make sure that we're constantly like showing them a new skill. If you've got a kid who can dribble with his right hand and go around everybody and score, okay, well, he's not going to still be able to do that 5 years from now. So can we start teaching him a skill that is uncomfortable for him? Okay, now we're going to teach you like a jab step and a crossover. And, now we're going to try to get you getting to the rim with 2 dribbles instead of 3 dribbles. And, so now all of a sudden, and I've done this before as a youth basketball coach, and all of a sudden you see them starting to stumble a little bit. Oh man, I can't do that. Well, that's what, you need a skill that you're uncomfortable with. For this kid down here, it might just be, can he dribble 3 times without dribbling off his foot? For you, it is, can you get to the rim from the 3-point line in 2 dribbles rather than three? Constant as coaches, we've got to push those good players and get them to a point where they're developing too. And that's what I'm saying. I think the biggest thing is, I guess, out of all this is you're right when we're talking about it's not play versus practice. It's a way to manage both. I think we've got to figure out a way to push and develop all skill levels, right, within the limited time that we have, so that we can still play games and do those things. And I think it just takes creativity. I think it takes some time management. I think it takes some, practice planning and maybe working on things that kids can't work on their own, or maybe don't know how to work on their own. There's a lot that goes into it. I think the thing that I hope this show does is just create some thought and some discussion, because I think sometimes as little league coaches, we don't put enough thought and prep into our practice planning. We just sort of do what we've always done, or we do what our little league coaches did. You know what I mean?
Great point. That's
like, well,
point.
our little league
coaches show up and just, decide on the spot what they're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, our little,
well,
our little league coaches lined 10 guys up here at first, and one by one they ran to second. Well, maybe there's a better way to do that. A more time efficient way to do that, right? And yeah, so yeah, no, you're right. I mean, we've probably all fallen into that trap where we've worked all day and man, I didn't have time to write everything down and we're showing up to practice and trying to figure it out. But as a whole, we need to have a plan, right? So that because we just talked on the show, we don't have a lot of practice time in youth sports. So we better maximize, how we use it for sure.
Well, Matt, that's a lot of fun. I tell you what, I had some ideas for shows coming up, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't think it would relate to this show as well as I think it's going to. But like for people who don't know, I kind of put a teaser out there for one of our upcoming shows. I'm not sure if Matt wants to squeeze one more in here in July because I know we've got 2 or 3 topics we've been holding on to. But one, Matt, that I've really been looking at is the dead period. Here in August, it'll be the dead period for high
Right.
school basketball, and every sport, a lot of sports have these dead periods where you're not allowed to be in contact with your players. And I've got some different ideas there, and it kind of, when you think of practicing and preparing kids to at some point practice on their own, I think that kind of links back to the way they were taught and the way they were brought up in little leagues. I think there's some good stuff there. So we'll have some different things coming up. I'm hoping to get another July show in, maybe 2, but then as we get closer and closer to August, be looking out for that show as well. But well, Matt, that's a lot of fun here on Show 44. As always, we want to thank Dr. Chris Good for all the support on our YouTube channel. Right now we're doing a lot of expanding the zone. We'll continue to do this. We get into high school sports. You'll see other high school content on the YouTube channel as well, and he does a great job of supporting that. But on that note, continue to really balance this play and practice. I don't know if it's anything we'll ever perfect, but I think we have to have these healthy discussions in order to make sure that we're progressing in the right way. So on that note, we'll see you here in about a week here on Expanding the Zone. But we appreciate you listening and watching Show 44. Thanks, everybody.